Hey there, how are you? So you're getting ready to cook dinner and you lose power. So you got this stove here, and this stove, well, it works on 220 volts. It's not the best thing to try to hook up to a generator because you would need two separate circuits. What you could do is use this inductive stove. That works pretty nice. Turn this on, 1,000 to 2,000 watts of power. You know, if you really want to run your generator at load, that would be a good thing, especially if it's a diesel generator. Keep your cylinders from carbonizing. But you are going to use more fuel trying to use a stove on a generator. So if you don't have power, that's not the best thing. What you could do is use this camping stove, which is running on butane at the moment. It's not very efficient. The amount of butane going out of here is direct contact with the pan, unlike that induction stove, but it's using up butane quite quickly. You could go with fuel that's liquid, like kerosene or gasoline, and change out the orifices on the stove. But again, I don't like this stove for large pots. I mean, you're limited. So it works, but it's not the best option. And these canisters are about $6 a piece. When I purchased this 10 years ago, this canister, it was about $3. The cost to fill one of my smaller propane tanks is $3, and that price hasn't changed very much in the last 10 years. Okay, over here you have a kerosene stove, which requires preheating by putting alcohol in this cup, burning it, filling it up again, burning it, maybe filling it up again. And if you're in a windy situation, good luck with that. Once it gets hot enough, this area right here is where the fuel will burn. You pump up the stove here, and basically what happens is pressure builds up and pushes fuel through the burner assembly. It vaporizes and burns like a gas. The advantage here is that the fuel has a huge amount of energy for every milliliter of fuel that's used. Problem I have is that finding kerosene in this area is getting harder and harder, so you could use lamp oil. Benefit of that is it doesn't stink as much, but the downside of that is it's quite expensive. The other part here is that this stove, the flame is this wide, and there's a lot of soot that builds up, and you can imagine what type of soot you would have on the bottom of your pan. So a small area would basically heat this part of the pan, so you're going to be spending a long time waiting for the rest of the pan to heat up. It'll work. It's nice. You've seen other videos. If you look back in some of my videos, I'm actually cooking breakfast with that. Over here, you could use these camping stoves, but outdoor use only. Reason being is that this hose here, you've got a leak point here, a leak point there, a leak point right here, because I'm connecting two hoses together. Here's the regulator. That's normally connecting to a smaller propane tank. Here is the connector for a larger propane tank, and that connects in there. So those are potential points for a leak. Propane is heavier than air, so if you're using these, always put the propane tank further down where it's not going to ignite, being right next to the stove. That's one of the reasons why I use the hose, so I don't have, the propane tank so close. So I use a hose and make it go further away. Those are nice iron skillets. Okay, so that leaves us with this. We have a dual fuel stove that's made by Grill Boss. It runs on propane. It runs on butane, except in this case, 250 grams of butane is about half the price of 230 grams of butane in this canister over here. So you get your money's worth for butane. So butane and propane are similar in terms of their heat for every gram of fuel, but you pay a lot for the canister. I don't know of any refillable butane canisters that are out there on the market like this refillable propane tank. This is one of the only items that I've seen out on the market that's refillable, legally refillable, and certified. So you can refill this with propane. Don't believe what you see on YouTube where people are refilling these butane tanks. Those valves will fail. And refillable propane tanks it's a dangerous situation that you're getting yourself into. This is much thicker steel, and this has a valve on it to allow for you to fill it properly. Refilling a non-refillable propane tank and transporting it, the word here is transport, can get you a $500,000 fine and 5 years in prison. Not really an exciting thing for anybody's future out there, and it's dangerous. If you notice that the butane tank here has a blue circle on the inside of that seam there, what that is there is a series of perforations that if this tank were to be overpressurized because of high temperatures, the butane will vent out through those little indentations rather than this little situation here that's shown in this picture, an explosion. You certainly would be better off with venting rather than pieces of metal embedded in your face. Of course, if this is near an ignition source, it will burn, but the consequences of that are far less than an explosive force of a butane tank blowing up. Okay, safety first. That's why I wanted to mention it. One of the things that you'll see here is that there's a weight that I wrote on here when I purchased this. It's 351 grams when it's full. That includes the container, based on the calculation of 250 grams. This is 101.53 grams with the container and this cap. I did weigh the cap separately, 1.69 grams. So it's just some information to know about, so that when you're using it, you know how much butane you have left over. So with the cap, I can put it on this scale and we can weigh it. You have 135 grams total, canister and the butane that's inside of here. So on my website, I've got this little chart here, which you can use if you want to download it from grayscale.zone, and it has the weight of the canister with the fuel in it and the percentages that are left over, and also show you how much fuel is left over. So 135 grams of canister plus fuel is 14%, which means I have 35 grams of fuel left over. So I could probably get maybe 3 more meals in the morning with that if I was cooking an omelet. So anyways, here's the stove itself. It has an area where you put your butane tank. Also, this is where you connect the propane hose right here. This is a pressure regulator, and this lever right here is used to connect the butane canister to the inlet valve. Over here is a reset button. In case it gets overpressurized, you can remove the tank and push the reset. So why is that important? You still have people out there who think it's a good idea to refill these, and if they give you a refilled container and it's overpressurized, this thing will not let you use it. That's a nice safety feature. So please, please, please do not refill these containers. They're not meant to be refilled, all right? If this container was hot and you put it in here, it will not allow for butane to go through. Another feature is if you had it turned on and you tried to connect the butane tank, you notice that little notch right there on the collar and this spring-loaded lever right here, so it's in place. You cannot connect it. You have to turn it off first before you can connect the butane container. So that's really nice. So anyways, as you can see, it's all loaded up and ready to go. Before you test this thing, look on the inside here, make sure there's nothing in there. That was one of the things that I was looking at here. When I first got this little proprietary propane hose, I couldn't find it, and I looked inside and it was inside of the stove. So great place to store it, but don't forget about it unless you want a melted hose. One of the things that I also noticed here is that there's this piece of metal coming off of the collar, and that goes into this area here where the tank is located. And what that does is it gently warms the tank so that as the butane fuel is used up, there's pressure released, and because pressure release is taking place, the can's going to cool down. Okay, so it's a liquid at 0 degrees Celsius. unless it's pressurized. So that's why the canister is cooling. So that's important to keep it going, but it never overheats so far that I've seen. Also, there's vents on the side to keep it cool. There's a release vent there, right here on the sides. So this thing is adequately vented. So I'll put this back on top of here. So this is what the stove looks like. When you use butane, it's very convenient. Just turn it on, and it's ready to go. That's a lot of heat. Turning it down to simmer mode right there, I find that competes with an electric stove very well. It does a great job. It's actually better than what I have experienced on a stove. At that higher temperature, where I had it way up high, you can sear steaks and cook wine on a wok, but you're definitely going to use a lot more fuel. So let's remove this. What I'll do is remove the canister. And I always make sure that I put the lid back on top of here so that the lid protects the nozzle. And so what I'm going to do next is hook up the propane canister. So let's go over the hose. This is a proprietary hose. This connector right here is just used to connect to the stove down here. And this is the pressure regulator. Now what's interesting about this pressure regulator is it's about twice the pressure of an ordinary propane stove. So what that means is that you have the ability to burn very hot on this stove. So imagine a situation where you have a wok and you're trying to cook something. You can cook it really well on here, or if you took a filet mignon and cooked it in a sous vide for several hours, and then you wanted to sear the steak on an iron skillet, this will do the job for you, and it will do it very effectively. But since you're using up a lot of fuel, you're going to want to turn it down when you're wanting to simmer something. So you have the capability of using a lot of fuel like an afterburner on a fighter jet, or sipping fuel like a glider plane. Okay, so what I'm going to do is turn this completely off, and the first thing that you do is you run the hose through this little hole in the back here, and then you attach the hose to the threads on the regulator. So you got two regulators. You got a regulator on the tank, and you have a regulator at the stove, and those work together nicely to prevent accidents. So you want this to be hand tight. You're not going to use a pair of pliers to tighten that. This is good enough. Make sure that this is turned off, and you always connect this first. The next part here is to connect this to the top of the propane tank. So we'll just rotate the tank. And since this is a smaller tank, this is rated for indoor use. The stove itself is rated for indoor use, but they have a caveat to that. Indoor use in a catering facility, like a commercial facility. Residential, they don't recommend it. I think that's lawyer speak. But I'll let you make your informed decision on that. Over here I have a holder for the propane tank so it doesn't fall over, and it has legs that open on it if I want to give it further stability. So I'm going to keep this further away from the stove, because I always like to keep the flammable tank as far away as possible. And then here we'll start it up. So there's a lot more pressure on this, so you have to give it time to start. It wants to blow itself out, and then you go back down to that simmer level. So this is probably the best level right here for cooking. And if you go real high, you're going to burn your food, and if you go too low, obviously you won't cook it. So for purposes of cooking, you start out and get this pan nice and hot, and then you turn it down. What's nice about this is I can use this to season my pans. I can already feel the pan's getting warm. I'm going to turn that off. All right, so there you have it. Dual fuel. You have this situation where you can power this with propane, or you can power it with butane fuel. And if you need to, you go to my website, you can pull down this chart, you can print one, and just stick it inside of the case. So the case itself is a plastic case. It's kind of flimsy. You never want to cook inside of this case because you will burn and melt the case, but you can use the case as, you could use the case as a windbreaker so that if you have a windy situation, it won't blow out your flame. And then there's an instruction manual. I highly recommend reading that first before you operate the stove. So again, I want to stress an important safety feature here. When you're connecting your propane tank, it's the last thing you connect and it's the first thing you disconnect. So I'm going to pull it off of this base. Make sure that this is turned off and there's no flames nearby because there's a little bit of propane that might leak out of this hose. We will turn the propane tank. I felt a little bit of propane come out of there. I can smell it. Release the pressure from the hose. Then disconnect the hose from the stove. At this point, I would advise you to make sure that you don't have an ignition source around when you do this. Probably better to do this outdoors if you're afraid about having a leak, if you're not sure what you're doing. So propane hose, when you're done with it, and this thing cools off nicely. I wouldn't be able to hold this if it was really that hot. You'd obviously want to wait for the stove to cool down. Just put the propane hose back in here, taking care not to damage any of the delicate parts. Just like that. So I'm going to show you the inside of this. So in the stove itself, you have a piezoelectric igniter right here that is activated when you turn the knob. And so that connects to this igniter, and then this ceramic nozzle protects the wire from damage, from heat damage, and then it just sparks across here where this is ignited. The fuel tube is right here, and it goes to the regulator. Again, you have the reset, and you have this lever here, which helps get the the butane tank, helps it fit in there properly. So again, don't refill these things. I just want to make sure I stress that enough. So thank you for watching. I'll put links below in the description for some of these components so that you can view them and pick them up if you like. I'm an Amazon affiliate, so if you were to click through one of those links at no cost to you, you could help me by making a purchase on Amazon. One of the other things is this Mystify. This thing is really nice for spraying oil onto these pans for cooking, so it's better than having a spray container. Anyways, that's it. I just wanted to let everybody know that one of the best stoves that I've seen for compact use, putting it in the car, going somewhere, having a picnic, and having a nice meal. And you can cook on this thing on a regular basis pretty effectively. So thank you for watching. Appreciate it.